It began with a quiet kind of sadness, the type that didn't need attention to exist. It settled in Mara's chest like an old stone, patient and heavy. She carried it everywhere, down grocery store aisles, through sleepless nights, into the mirror where she practiced smiling until it looked real. Mara had only recently learned how to survive being unloved, and survival had left her gentle, fragile in ways that hurt more than it healed. On a night that felt borrowed from someone else's life, she met Elias. Rain blurred the streets into puddled reflections, and a flickering streetlight cast a hesitant glow. Elias stood there, soaked and still, as if the world had already claimed all that was loud and bright in him. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of damage, not happiness. If you've ever loved, lost, or felt broken by someone you cared about, this channel is for you. Subscribe, like, and stay with us for more real stories that speak from the heart. You look tired, he said softly. So do you, Mara replied. That was all it took. From the very beginning, love felt urgent like oxygen. Mara and Elias didn't fall slowly. They collapsed into each other. Each word Mara spoke felt significant, weighed with meaning, and Elias listened as though her pain mattered. He held her hands with a fear that she might disappear if he loosened his grip. Mara noticed the shape of his silences, the tension in his jaw when he spoke of his childhood, the way he woke gasping from dreams he refused to explain. Together, they created a home from the remnants of each other's wounds, a fragile shelter built on shared fractures. With Elias, Mara felt chosen, needed, seen in a way that she had longed for. He called her his safe place, his anchor, and when he said, "I don't know who I'd be without you," it sounded like devotion, not warning. At first, Elias's attention felt like care. Every question, every check-in, seemed to come from a place of concern rather than control. "Have you eaten?" he would ask, or, "Where are you? Who are you with?" Mara felt special in ways she had never known. No one had ever worried about her this much. She mistook intensity for intimacy, believing that such vigilance was love. Elias loved her as though the world might snatch her away if he looked away for even a second. Every laugh with a friend made his chest tighten. Every unanswered message sparked panic. "I just worry," he said, voice low, almost pleading. Mara nodded. She wanted to be worthy of his worry. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the walls between them began to shrink. What started as care became expectation. The small signs came first. A sigh when she stayed out late. A comment about a friend who didn't really care about her. A hurt look when she chose silence instead of reassurance. Elias needed her presence as proof of safety, and Mara learned to offer it, even when exhaustion weighed on her. She began to censor herself. Certain stories were left untold because they upset him, certain clothes avoided because they made him anxious. She answered her phone immediately, terrified that his fear might spiral. Each compromise felt temporary, a small price to pay until he felt secure. But the security never came. Slowly, the emotional space between them narrowed, leaving Mara increasingly confined. She whispered to herself, "This is what love costs." Elias didn't vanish physically, but he began to drift emotionally. Some days he was tender, apologetic, full of soft promises. Other days he was distant, cold, unreachable. Mara never knew which version she would encounter, and each interaction became a delicate dance. When she asked what was wrong, he said nothing. When she pulled back to protect herself, he accused her of abandoning him. "You're changing," he said once, voice trembling. "You don't love me the way you used to." Mara searched herself desperately. Am I failing him? She doubled her efforts, trying harder, loving harder, reading every subtle shift in his moods. She became fluent in walking on eggshells. When he denied what he had said or felt, she questioned her own memory instead of his intentions. It was easier to believe she was flawed than that love could hurt. Sometimes, in quiet moments alone, Mara glimpsed the woman she had once been. She remembered laughing without caution, dreaming without limits. Those memories felt like photographs of a stranger. Meanwhile, Elias was unraveling too. He hated his dependence on her, despised the emptiness when she wasn't near. His love had transformed into a cage he didn't know how to unlock. He watched Mara shrink and convinced himself it was closeness, tightened his grip, believing control was protection. Neither knew how to stop. Love had become a force that bound them rather than healed them, and every gesture intended to connect only drove the other further into silence or fear. Mara's exhaustion grew quietly, imperceptibly, like water wearing down stone. She carried the weight of his moods, his fears, his silences, and her own heart began to ache under the pressure. She no longer spoke freely. Every word was measured. Every laugh was cautious. The comfort she had once felt in Elias's presence now carried a subtle tension, a sense that any misstep could ignite his anxiety. "I just don't want to lose you," he said one evening, voice low and raw, his hand gripping hers tightly. Mara nodded, swallowing her own thoughts. If this is love, why does it feel so heavy, she wondered. She still wanted to be the safe harbor he believed her to be, even as the walls closed in. Slowly, Mara realized that she had begun to disappear. Small pieces of herself were left behind in quiet compromises. Her favorite dress that never saw the light of day, the stories she no longer told, the words she swallowed instead of speaking. Each sacrifice was rationalized as love, as care, as protection for Elias. And yet, the more she gave, the more distant he seemed to become. Some nights she would watch him sleep, his face peaceful, and feel a pang of emptiness. He was near, but she didn't know him anymore, and in losing him emotionally, she felt the edges of herself blur. Elias noticed her changes, but not as Mara did. He believed her attentiveness was waning, that her silences were a threat rather than self-preservation. "You're not the same," he said one night, voice trembling. "You don't care like you used to." Mara's chest tightened. Am I failing him again, she thought. And so she tried harder. Every laugh was moderated, every word carefully chosen, every movement calculated to keep the fragile peace. When he accused her of neglect, she apologized. When he denied things he had said, she questioned herself. She had become fluent in a language of caution, a constant balancing act between his fears and her survival. Elias's love became a mirror reflecting only what he needed it to, a constant reassurance, a proof of devotion. He struggled to distinguish care from possession, protection from control. Mara felt the walls tighten with every passing day. And yet she stayed, driven by the memory of the early tenderness, the nights when his hand fit perfectly in hers, when his presence felt like a sanctuary. That memory became a tether, a lifeline she clung to despite the growing weight of anxiety, the quiet erosion of her own desires. The truth of their lives settled quietly, almost unnoticed, in the spaces between conversations. Mara longed for freedom, for laughter that didn't feel borrowed, for her own identity to exist alongside his. But every attempt to reclaim herself sparked tension. Elias saw independence as threat, and she saw control disguised as love. Their home, once a refuge, now felt like a carefully constructed cage of invisible bars. And the hardest part was that neither knew how to break the pattern. They only knew the rhythm of it, the push and pull that left them both wounded and afraid. Mara sometimes remembered who she had been before Elias, and the memories felt like snapshots of a stranger. She had once laughed freely, dreamed boldly, and moved through life without fear of reprisal. Those versions of herself now seemed distant, faint echoes behind a wall of careful words and measured gestures. Each attempt to reclaim her old self was met with subtle resistance from Elias. "Why do you need to go out?" he asked one evening, voice low but insistent. "Why can't you just stay?" Mara hesitated, realizing that even the simplest desire for independence now carried weight. She nodded, keeping her longing locked inside. This is love, she told herself, even as it stifled her. Elias too was unraveling. His dependency on Mara was no longer tender. It had transformed into a suffocating need. He hated himself for needing her so much, hated the emptiness that gnawed at him when she wasn't near. But he could not stop. Each moment of her absence felt like abandonment, each laugh outside his presence a betrayal. And so he clung tighter, convinced that control was protection, that fear disguised as love would keep her from slipping away. The more he tightened his grip, the more she shrank. Neither of them realized that their love, once fragile and precious, had grown into a trap neither could escape. The gaslighting was subtle at first, a denial here, a shifting of blame there. "I never said that," Elias would insist, even when Mara's memory was clear. "You're imagining things." She began to doubt herself, questioning the reliability of her own mind. It was easier to believe she was flawed than to accept that the one she loved could hurt her. Every apology she offered was layered with self-blame, every reassurance a surrender. Love had become a currency of survival, not joy. She walked on eggshells, navigating his moods with precision. Her own desires tucked away, her laughter muted. There were moments, rare and fragile, when the tenderness returned. Elias would brush a stray hair from her face, whisper a quiet apology, or hold her in a way that felt like protection again. In those moments, Mara remembered why she had fallen. She clung to these fragments, believing that beneath the fear and control, love still existed. But the moments were fleeting, and the pattern always returned. A withdrawal, a cold shoulder, an accusation, a sigh. The tenderness became a mirage, reminding her of a safety that was no longer consistent. Mara's exhaustion became a constant companion. She carried the weight of Elias's moods, the pressure of his expectations, and the silence of her own erased desires. Sleep offered no relief. Her dreams were haunted by worry, by the fear of misstepping, by the subtle terror that love itself had become a cage. She asked herself repeatedly, "Why do I stay?" The answer was always the same. Because once, love had felt like oxygen. Once, it had been life-saving. And though the air had turned heavy and suffocating, she could not yet let go of the memory of its purity. The cracks between them grew wider, yet no one spoke of them. Their conversations became careful, cautious, polite on the surface but tense underneath. Even laughter was tempered, measured, as if any excess could spark conflict. Mara felt the weight of his attention, his scrutiny, pressing down like a physical force. She tried to accommodate it, to mold herself into the perfect version of love he required, but each compromise cost her pieces of her own identity. And still she stayed, tethered to a memory of warmth that no longer fully existed. The breaking point arrived not with anger, but with exhaustion. One evening, Mara sat on the edge of their bed, watching Elias sleep beside her. His breathing was steady, peaceful, oblivious to the storm inside her. She felt nothing but fatigue, a hollow emptiness where her love had once lived. Memories of all the compromises, apologies, and silences pressed on her chest. "I don't know who I am anymore," she realized. The thought was terrifying but clear. The woman who had once loved freely, laughed openly, and dreamed boldly had been replaced by someone cautious, small, and constantly measured. She felt the absence of herself more acutely than the fear of leaving. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled but carried determination. "I'm leaving," she said softly. Elias stirred, eyes wide, panic flickering across his face. He reached for her hand, clinging, desperate. "Wait," he whispered. "Please. Can change. I'll do anything." Mara looked at him, the memory of their early tenderness flashing in her mind. She wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to the hope that love could return to what it once was. But she had learned, painfully, that promises could not undo months of fear, control, and self-erasure. Elias cried, raw and terrified, the way broken people do. He confessed everything he thought he could fix, every fear he would abandon, every reassurance he could give. Mara listened, her own heart heavy, but she knew that believing in his words would cost her herself. She did not respond immediately. She simply breathed, letting the quiet between them speak louder than words. The love that had once been life-saving had become life-consuming. Leaving was not an act of cruelty, but of self-preservation. Mara walked away carrying guilt as if it were a second heart. She remembered every tender moment, every laugh, every quiet whisper. And yet she also remembered the cost. Elias learned to breathe without her presence, slowly, painfully, while she began the work of finding herself again. Scars remained, tender and hidden beneath smiles and normalcy. Nights were often the hardest. Memories of him lingered, a soft ache in the chest that refused to fade. She wondered sometimes if staying longer could have saved them, if patience could have been enough to bring back the warmth of early love. But deep down Mara knew the truth. Some love stories do not end in hatred or relief. They end in quiet regret, a lingering echo of what was lost and what could never be reclaimed. Love, when poisoned by fear and control, leaves behind only fragments. The self that survived, the self that was surrendered, and the knowledge of what could have been. She carried those fragments carefully, aware of their weight, aware of the lessons they bore. And in those lessons, she slowly found the beginnings of herself again. The silence after was the loudest part. Mara realized that the absence of chaos did not equal peace. It was simply emptiness that demanded reflection. She breathed again, truly breathed, feeling the space around her, feeling herself. Love had taken much, but it had also taught her resilience. She understood now that survival was not just endurance. It was reclaiming the pieces of herself that had been hidden, lost, or given away. And while she sometimes thought of Elias, sometimes wondered if he had changed, she carried no bitterness, only a quiet, painful understanding. Love could heal, but it could also take, and only by letting go could one hope to live again. Months later, Mara received a message she could not ignore. A photo of Elias smiling with someone else, his hand in theirs, laughter spilling where it had once belonged to her. The sight struck her like a physical blow, a cruel confirmation that life had moved on without her. Every memory of tenderness, every whispered promise, every night she had stayed awake trying to hold him together felt meaningless. Anger, grief, and an unbearable ache flooded her chest all at once. The love she had poured out, the self she had surrendered, the sacrifices she had made, none of it mattered anymore. She realized with bitter clarity that some people never change, and some love stories don't heal. They simply scar, leaving the heart hollow and haunted. Mara sank to the floor, shaking, knowing that the wound was permanent, that the person she had loved with everything would never be hers again, and that the quiet, unrelenting pain of betrayal would echo for the rest of her life.